I see considerable evidence of obstruction of justice, which is what Mueller said.
I think there are factual allegations of what the president did where he tried to interfere with this investigation. That, to me, is very clear by the facts presented by Mr. Mueller.
On the issue of obstruction of justice, the report outlines multiple attempts by the president to mislead the country, to interfere with the investigation, to make false statements to the American people, and to urge others to lie to the American people, to urge those of his staff to take actions to further obstruct the investigation.
Mueller said there was considerable evidence of obstruction of justice. The report concluded there was substantial evidence that President Trump attempted to prevent an investigation into his campaign and his own conduct.
It shows 10 separate instances of obstruction of justice. While it says that it reaches no conclusion, it also does not exonerate the president on the issue of obstruction.
It is clear to me that the conduct of the president here is just not what you want from a president of the United States. You don't want a president trying to interfere with an investigation.
I can't think of anybody in this whole country that if they had done maybe one or two of those things in the 10 that Mueller cites, that would not be indicted today. No doubt about it.
The idea that the report proves no obstruction is completely at odds with hundreds of pages in the report which document efforts by the president to undermine the investigation.
The report makes clear that the president refused to be interviewed by the special counsel and refused to provide written answers to follow-up questions. Page 13 of Volume 2.
In terms of obstruction of justice, certainly Mr. Mueller had the opportunity to say there was no obstruction of justice. He did not. He said he couldn't reach a conclusion as to whether that occurred. There were incidents which he cited but didn't conclude that they related to obstruction of justice. He left that as an open question. That question is now open for the American people to conclude.
There apparently has been some destruction of evidence. That's another thing that we want to look into. There's a Presidential Records Act. And I want to know who was destroying evidence. That's another thing that stopped Mueller from being able to complete his job. And a lot of this stuff may have been directed by the president.
It was devastating. And my office has just said, well, this is now the O.J. Simpson presidency, because everybody knows he did it. And it's incredibly discouraging to find out that if he weren't president of the United States, it was just Donald Trump, he almost certainly would have been indicted for obstruction of justice. That the Mueller is really clear in the report. In the 10 different times he investigated obstruction of justice, they basically says, because it's the president, Congress needs to indict him rather than the Department of Justice.
These actions had a material impact on the investigation, that in fact the special counsel was deprived of information, or at least the timely access to that information as a result of things that the president did and said. It made our job, certainly in our committee doing our investigation, that much more difficult as it did the special counsel's investigation.
Of course, we will back up Schiff and Intelligence, Congressman Schiff and Congressman Nadler in Judiciary as they proceed, because they're the two committees that have most jurisdiction.
The real test right now is whether or not Congress as an institution is going to lay aside political interests and do what I think Special Counsel Mueller is jumping up and down and telling us to do, is do what he could not do because the Office of Legal Counsel has a guideline that you cannot indict a sitting president.
And it's clear that Special Counsel Mueller wanted the Congress to consider the repercussions and the consequences. It is clear the Special Counsel believed that no one was above the law, and that includes the President of the United States.